4 of my Genealogy Live interviews YouTubers edition. Genealogy YouTubers edition. The title's still in work in progress. Nevertheless, so tonight I have genealogy YouTuber who does family trees of historical figures and much more. It is Jake the Genie, aka Jake the Genealogist.
Hello there.
Hello, Jake.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Hopefully, technology is good to me this evening. But other than that, I think I think we're all good. So let's get into it. So, for anyone watching that might not know who you are, why don't you introduce yourself a little?
Okay, so what I do on my channel is I was inspired by another history channel, that being Useful Charts, and he makes great family trees of royal monarchies and often famous people. And I got inspired by this and created my channel on the basis of making my own family trees of more obscure royal monarchies and historical figures. So, for example, I've made a family tree of figures like Anne Frank and Gandhi and Joseph Stalin and people like that, and of some more obscure monarchies like those in Africa and Asia.
Right, so quite a bit of a variety then.
Yes.
Fair enough. And how long have you been doing genealogy YouTube for?
Well, I started my channel back in February of 2020. So, right before the pandemic hit. So, it's been really
So
a pandemic
project, I
project for me.
assume. I think a lot of had pandemic projects.
Yeah, for
although
sure.
although for me it was school, so I'm not sure if you could really call that a project. But anyway, so how did you get into genealogy? What started it all off for you?
Well, it's an interesting story. So, the first time I got introduced to genealogy was years back when I was in the second grade. And basically, so we had some whole project where we had to present our genealogy. And I guess it was more so about culture and your family background, where you came from. And so, because of that project, I got introduced to my father's genealogy, which he did for a school project back when he was a kid. And that's what really started me all off on my own family. And then years later, I really got back into it and I started using genie.com, which is my favorite website for all of my genealogical findings. And it quickly became one of my favorite things to do in my pastime, because I find it really relaxing to do, and as opposed to the high stress things throughout the day. And I found lots of interesting stories ever since.
Very good. So, what resources have you found most helpful in your research?
Well, given that my family is of Jewish background, I'm 100% Jewish, according to a DNA test. I found a lot of these websites specifically catered to Jewish genealogy really helpful. Things like jewishgen.org and JRI Poland, to name a few, Yad Vashem, and a couple of these other websites have been really helpful in my research. But then, of course, some of the standard websites like Ancestry and MyHeritage have also been immensely helpful.
Cutting in and out, and or Jake's cutting out for me, so I'm not sure if anyone. Um,
Can you hear me?
Oh dear me.
Okay, you're back for me.
God, I've never ever had the internet go on this, so I had no clue how it worked.
Ugh.
But it involved a lot of button pressing. So to know for future reference. Anyway, I don't know where I cut out or what I said when I cut out, but anyway, we're just gonna ignore that. We're just gonna scratch that and move. So projects and ventures are you currently pursuing?
So currently, my family tree project that I'm working on, and really, I'm only about a little bit of the ways through, is I'm planning to make kind of a big family tree of multiple different families of Flemish artists. People like Bruegel and the Teniers family, and that's my current family tree project. And outside of that, I'm also working on a very big collaboration video. It's actually not related to genealogy, but it's related to US politics. I'm working on a video talking about the worst senators from each state in the United States. And this is going to be a big collaboration with a couple other YouTubers, and that should be coming out hopefully in about a week or so. So look forward to that.
Right. Sure if I can comment on any of that because obviously it's US, so I would know. So, is there anything that you now know that you wish you knew when you started?
Well, I guess if there's one major lesson I've learned over the years from doing genealogy, it's to really verify with using actual sources rather than other people's family trees. Because on a website like Ancestry or MyHeritage or Genie, for example, you're going to have people who don't check their sources and therefore put out faulty information on their family trees. And in a website where you might have some sort of smart matching feature and you can just copy over the data to your family tree, you're going to be spreading it even more. And so, one big takeaway here is that never trust fully some of these family trees. Always check the records before verifying and adding that to your own tree.
This is horrible. How can my internet be this bad? Why? Why tonight? Why does my internet be this bad? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear.
That last bit completely did not come across at all.
Okay, should I repeat what I said or just move
You
on?
were caught up until spreading like false thing, and obviously it goes into your tree and it just making it worse. I think that's where you're at.
Yeah, that's basically the premise of what I was saying. I was just saying that when you rely on other people's family trees as your only source, then you could be spreading false information even further. And it kind of causes, I guess, the butterfly effect. And more people are going to see your family tree and rely on that faulty information. And it's just going to become a whole mess in the end.
Hmm. Fair enough. Thank you for repeating that. um, so, what aspect of genealogy do you love the most? So, like finding old photos, seeing records, finding mentions of people in newspapers, that sort of thing.
Well, I feel like all aspects of genealogy really entice me. Because stuff like DNA, stuff like photos, stuff like finding really old records or, tracing back your ancestors all the way back to like the 1700s. Those are all really fascinating things to me. But I guess something recently, and I guess you mentioned this, that fascinates me is, of course, finding mentions of your relatives in newspapers. And I've been kind of focusing partly on that recently, and I found some really interesting stories in my family.
This takes a while for me to unmute because if I try typing a message in chat, you just hear click, 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 click from my keyboard. So mute myself and then it takes forever. So I try not to say much. But no, you're uh no, I do agree. Like I haven't necessarily found much about my family in my newspapers. There was like for me there was like this one piece. It was an obituary from when my great grandmother on my mother's side passed away. And it just kind of, death of Mrs. C. Whelan, um, kind of Abbeyside, Dungarvan, and just kind of gave a really detailed account about, her personality, all the contributions she did. So, kind of one organization that she was a part of was called Common and which is sort of like, um, it was a organization during the Irish War of Independence, and she was in the Waterford branch of it, and it just kind of confirmed that she did partake in it. That she did work in it, but I don't know exactly what she did in it, but I'm still finding that out.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Yeah, I have an interesting story that I found recently. This is about, I believe, my great great grandfather on my father's side, and he was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and apparently some kids came in, and because he worked at this like kind of general store, that was his job. He owned one general store, and apparently some kids came in and stole a bunch of baseball equipment. It was in like 1920s. That's pretty interesting.
It's just so random, but it's
Hmm.
those little bits you kind of see. It just kind of brings it a bit to life. Obviously, it's never going to fully do it, but yeah,
Yeah, it gives you a really good idea of what their personality was like, oftentimes as well.
yeah. Was he chasing him out of the store?
Yeah, I think he did actually.
I think that's justified, seeing as
Yeah,
they didn't
probably.
have an, a fair amount of equipment. So you kind of already answered the next question I was going to ask. I was going to jump in, but I just thought, no, save my Wi-Fi, let him talk. so, but I'll ask it again anyway. You might have something else you'd like to share. So, what's an interesting story or event that you've discovered about your ancestors?
Well, let me see. Trying to think of another interesting article.
It doesn't have to be an
Well,
article. It can be other books.
here's one that I found recently that was interesting, and it's about this. I haven't actually been able to confirm this branch of the family quite yet, but I have some pretty rock solid evidence at this point. But one of the people on this side of the family, this was in the 1950s, and they, I guess, in some part, started the trend of these things called do-it-yourself shows. And that's, I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think that's where the whole concept of DIY comes from. And so he put on all of these do-it-yourself shows all around the country. And so I found a bunch of articles about him really recently, and it's honestly very fascinating.
Nice. That'd be some claim to fame. Well, my relative came up with the idea for DIY shows. That'd be one nice claim to have.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mind a bit of interesting things on my father's side. I will be honest, but I just tend to farmers. Uh, it's my mother's side is somewhat interesting. I don't know. So, what type of record do you like the most, and why?
Well, for me, saying that like all of my great grandparents, except for one, were all immigrants. I think it's awesome to find naturalization records and immigration records. Those are my two favorite kinds to find because they just give so much information that's hidden. Like oftentimes a naturalization record, if you look at the bottom and you look at the affidavit of witnesses, oftentimes it could have relatives or other neighbors or close friends of the person who is submitting the petition, and that can give some really vital clues. And then, of course, on immigration records, a lot of the time they have the arrival contact and sometimes the departure contact names, and those can really open up to find new branches of the family who also were immigrants that you had no clue ever actually existed.
Hmm.
And I know I've had my fair share of discoveries which have happened because of that.
Yeah, and I mean, really. Now, I don't. All my direct ancestors are from Ireland. They didn't come from another country. Well, not that I can find anyway. And there was this one. I'm trying to figure out who it was. Oh, yes. So it was a granddaunt of mine who went over, and it was an affidavit, and it had the actual form and the affidavit, and there was on the form there's a kind of the box of the photo kind of the person going over.
Yeah.
There was actually a photo of her that no one had ever seen because she
Yeah.
went she went to the US in 1939, and she came back I think once in the 50s and then didn't come back again, or at least not to my knowledge. So people hardly saw her, and to see that photo, everyone was kind of like, "Oh my god, I've never seen a photo of that person," and then kind of went to the affidavit, and it kind of said the surname Divine, Devine, but I had no clue as to who this Divine people were. And I would later find out that the Divines were actually, well, you had two Divines. You had Catherine Divine, which was my grandaunt Kitty's aunt, and the other Divine was her son, or Kitty's cousin. So yeah, and I had no idea. I had is this would be coming from her mother's side, and there were a load of girls. It was all girls. There were 6 girls, and I knew what happened to some of them, and yet there were some that I had no clue. And honestly, I haven't. I completely. I have forgot. Well, I have forgotten to say this to WikiTree, but I will tag him in the tweet after this and watch this. But this is what you can use as a quote. So when I looked, especially on my Noon side, which is my great grandmother's side, they. I only knew what happened to some of them, but I didn't know what happened to another. And there is this one. This is a Kearney 11. No, this is 11. Actually, I'm going off topic. Sorry, scratch the Noons. They're not part of this one. But it was on my nana's side that they had found Because I had word of mouth from a cousin who got it from a family Bible that this lady, Annie Lavin, who would be my great granddad, married this guy with the surname O'Hora, which is O''Hora. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not find a record of them in Ireland. Funnily enough, she ended up emigrating like two of her other sisters, and they figured out which O'Hora it was. And I now have a new lead to go looking at, and I need to find time to do it. So that they're a wiki tree that they can use. And no, that like, and I get what you mean with Genie being a collaborative platform. Like, I think Genie and WikiTree, like, granted, they're going to be so like certain people are going to like them, some people aren't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm by no means against it. But I'm not totally for it. Just
Got it.
not 100%. Like 99% was just like there's this 1% that kind of goes, yeah. But no, honestly, that, and I am being honest. I'm not kind of thinking, oh, I better not offend them. Like, I am genuinely being honest with the amount of work that they had done. Like, my view of collaboration with platforms like Genie and WikiTree has completely changed. Like, now I'd be all for it if I can find the time,
Mm-hmm.
but not enough hours in a day. As you probably realize, well, Jake, doing other bits. So, what does genealogy mean to you?
Well, genealogy means a lot to me because even though, I'm not religious really in any way, I do feel a strong connection to my Jewish heritage, and I feel like genealogy really brings me one step closer, and because I'm able to, in some senses, connect myself to important figures in Jewish history. Like, for example, there's one branch of my family. The rest of my branches, I can only really trace back to maybe late 1700s at max. But there's this one branch of the family which is connected to a whole rabbinical dynasty, which you can trace all the way back to like the 10th century. It traces back super far. And through that line, there's a sixth great grandfather I have who was really fascinating because he was a part of the Jewish Enlightenment called Haskalah. Very famous member of that was Moses Mendelssohn. Fun fact, grandfather of composer Felix Mendelssohn. And so my sixth great grandfather was also a member of this. And it's really cool being able to connect to him. I even wrote a Wikipedia page about him and being able to connect to a lot of other famous Jews who changed the world. And so that really means a lot to me.
I can imagine. That's some connection.
Yeah.
I don't think my farmer family would have something like that, though. I don't think so. Oh dear. Rightio. So I'm getting near the end of my questions. So if anyone watching has any questions that they'd like to ask, please get them in now. I didn't say that last week, so I'm making sure to get it in now before I forget. Oh dear. Right. So, what advice would you give to a young person starting out in genealogy?
Well, I suppose the advice I'd give here is, I guess, the same thing that I wish I knew when I began my genealogical journey. The thing I mentioned about always checking sources. Do not rely only on family trees made by other people. You got to check the actual records. And that's probably the advice I'd give to any young person who is starting out.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, and my final one. You made it through. Oh dear. So, with times changing and more young people getting into genealogy, like, do you believe, in your own opinion, that there is enough outlets for them to like connect and young genealogists and just have a place where they can go and not feel like they're alone in the topic of genealogy, like a young person doing it?
Well, in my opinion, I don't think there are enough places when you look at it. And at least in my experience, I really don't know in my personal life any other young people who are genealogists.
Hmm.
And, most of the people in my life who I've met who have been interested in genealogy or are more elderly people, and even a lot of the time that's pretty tentative. It's not They're not really seriously interested in it. But I do think for all of the young genealogists there are in the world, there definitely needs to be some sort of better outlet somewhere there on the internet or whatever, to really
Yeah.
encourage people about how cool genealogy is.
No, totally. I absolutely agree. So, I think on that note, we shall end. So, thank you so much, Jake, for coming on and pushing up with me for half an hour and my horrible internet. Uh, I don't know why it just decided to go for today, but it did. We made it through about, so all
Yep.
good. And thank you to everyone who watches this now and in the future. And this is just an announcement because I have other commitments. So there will not be an interview next Saturday, the 23rd, but there will be, hopefully, should be, the 30th or the 31st. I'm aiming for the 30th, but depending on how busy I am, then it may be the first. But I've yet to see. But until I will see you all next time. So thanks
Pleasure
everyone.
talking to you.